Lawyers who read wills to families. What is the most interesting, bizarre, offensive, surprising thing you have had to read out loud? To my wife I leave her lover and the knowledge that I was never the fool she thought me. To my son I leave the pleasure of working for a living. For 25 years, he thought the pleasure was all mine. Best diss ever. Was in my wills. And trusts book and law school is an example of people talking shoot in their wills. You're supposed to discourage them as lawyers from doing so. A friend of mine was adopted at birth. When her mom died, the will gave half the estate to her 2 natural daughters. My friend got nothing. WTF. Best will story I personally know of. The father had a valuable antique grandfather clock. He also had 2 daughters. His solution: if I die on an even day, daughter A gets the clock, an odd day and daughter B gets it. The daughter who did not get the clock got an equivalent cash award based on the value of the clock. I know of the event because I had to service the clock several times over the years. My father-in-law was an accountant for some rather wealthy people. One of them was asking him to assist with writing up his will worth millions. The final addition he suggested was that if the children contested it, they get nothing. They contested it for years. We had a client who was a widowed farmer who owned several heavy equipment Caterpillar trucks, etc. He had 2 sons who were already working with him at the farm and a daughter who was working in the city. He willed the heavy equipment to the daughter. When asked why, since these equipment were essential to the farm, he said that the farm was to go his kids equally, but his girl needed to know he always wanted her to join their venture and dispel her notions of alienation because she was a girl. It's very rare to read a will out loud. That's mostly in the movies. Normally I just make extra copies and pass them out to whoever in the family wants to read it. Edit 1. Though the most unusually thing in a will I saw was man leaving a good chunk of money for his mistress that wife knew nothing about. It was interesting to see sadness and anger fighting to win in the wife. She finally laughed and said, "What a motherfricker." Lawyer here. I once amended a will for a doctor in which he disinherited his son by removing everything he had intended to bequeath and replacing it with a manure spreader. I didn't ask any questions because changing a will is an easy thing to do. But one day, that doctor will die and his son will have essentially be told to eat shoot. My maternal grandpa was wealthy. He divorced my maternal grandma, remarried, and promptly dropped dead of a heart attack. He was only 48 and had no will, so everything went to his new wife, my mom's stepmother. She was actually really nice and was planning on making sure that everything was fair. Till she died in a car accident 6 months later. She was a widow herself prior to marrying grandpa and had a now orphaned 15-year-old son from the previous marriage who got everything. My mom and her siblings had to go to the auction at their childhood home and buy back as much of their heirlooms and memories as they could afford, and, truthfully, stole some of what they couldn't. Edit I know words. I know. No lawyer here, but I had to share. A woman came in after her mother's funeral with some correspondence from the company I work for insurance. She was worried there was a bill she needed to pay and was coming to tell us her mom had died. She just looked so tired, and we got to talking while I looked up the policy to close it out. She shared that in the last few years her mom had slipped into dementia and she single-handedly took care of her. How she missed her, but just was run ragged, and she hadn't taken a vacation in forever. I realized what she had was not a health policy, it was a life insurance policy naming the daughter as the beneficiary for about $50,000. I told her, and she just started crying. It made me cry, and I got up and hugged her and sort of just held her while she cried. She pulled away and said, "I have no idea what she left that for. Everything's been paid for." I said, "This might be her telling you to go on that vacation and relax." It was so touching, and she had no idea that the policy existed. Edit. Thanks for the gold. : My estate planning professor told us about a guy who had 2 families, neither of which knew about the other until it was time to read the will. This wasn't like a love child / mistress type scenario. Both were nuclear multi-kid families. Both families showed up for what had to be one of the most awkward will reading in history. I don't really know how he pulled it off other than that he was away on business frequently. I know you're looking for lawyers and whatnot, but here, have my mediocre will story anyway. My great grandmother left her daughter just $1 and not a single penny more, so help me God. This was before I was born, but my grandmother, not the daughter with the dollar, said that when they all read the will her sister had a full-blown temper tantrum and no one heard from her since. I guess she had it coming. In olden days, it used to be typical to bequeath $1 so that, if challenged, the judge saw that they were not forgotten and purposefully meant to not get more. If a close family member or loved one got nothing, they would often challenge they were forgot. Might not be true in this case, but something I remember studying. In my trusts and estates class in law school, we read a case about a man who left everything to his wife, but only if she got his body stuffed and left it on the living room couch forever. Luckily for her, the court invalidated that part of the husband's will. Part of the reasoning was that it would make it impossible for her to date/remarry if she had her husband's creepy dead body glaring at anyone who came to see her. My grandfather hated his neighbor. They lived next to each other for 20+ years. I remember well my grandfather raging at every opportunity about this guy. We never saw them speak to each other. In grandpa's will he left the guy $10K, a car and golf clubs. We were dumbstruck. Turns out they were good buddies from the army. When they coincidentally bought homes next to each other, they decided to play a long scam with both their families. They actually played golf together too, 3x per week, and had a monthly poker game for years. To my daughter Anne, who created my beautiful granddaughter Jane, and her dear fourth husband John, who laid hands on my Jane, I leave $1, you money grubbing bastards. To Jane I leave all of my monetary assets, save $5,000 and my best gun, which I'll leave to my son Bill, on the condition that he beats John bloody during the time between my funeral and my burial. Jane, bail your uncle out of jail please. Other than names, this is the exact wording of a great uncle's will, but of it anyway. At age 9 Jane told her mother that John had molested her, and her mother told her she deserved it for being a slut. So great uncle took Jane in and raised her, and his 2 kids got exactly what it says. His son also got a truck and technically a house, although he only kept it until Jane was a legal adult and could afford the tax on it. Bill got full custody of Jane when his father died, and he put every penny of her money into a trust fund to mature when she was 25, because he felt like his sister would try to get the money. He was right. And in case anyone wondered, yes, Bill got his $5 grand. He didn't get arrested though, because John had a warrant on him, so they didn't dare call the cops. Bill did kindly inform the police of his whereabouts a few weeks later. Not a lawyer, but sort of a sad story. When my dad's mother died, her will stipulated that everything was to be liquidated and the money distributed equally between her children and grandchildren. Fine, but literally everything had to be sold. There were family heirlooms, jewelry, things my grandfather, a carpenter, had made. So many sentimental family things that my father and his siblings badly wanted, but it all had to be sold. They all went to the auction to try to buy some of the more sentimental items, but weren't always successful. It was heartbreaking, and I'm not sure what made my grandmother think it would be a good idea. Nobody wanted the money. They wanted her wedding ring and the clocks my grandfather had made and all that. When my great uncle died, he left his beloved dog to his longtime girlfriend. All of his money went into a pet trust for said dog, which turned out to be quite a large sum of money. His 2 kids got nothing. As far as I know, he didn't have a bad relationship with them or anything. He just thought the world of his little dog. One summer I worked as an administrative assistant to a lawyer who worked in wills and estates. Most of it was the usual petty arguing about percentages of money, but one couple was deeply concerned about which of their children would receive the urn with the ashes of the family's long deceased cat. Would want to play favorites. One of my college buddies' dad died from cancer in our 2nd year. It wasn't a sudden death. He had been battling it for a couple years. When my friend came back to school, he casually mentioned that his dad left him and his sister $7 million each. Turns out, his dad had hit the lottery before my friend was born, invested/put all the money away to help pay for college/high school. His mom got a nice chunk of change also. He grew up thinking they were just ordinary middle class family. We had a glorious 3rd and 4th year of college, thanks to my loaded friend. Edit, he did know his dad won the lottery, but it was never mentioned to him, or his sister, that it was a lot of money. Oh dear, my first not me, but a friend post. Someone had left an entire golf course that he owned and managed in secret to his son. They were avid golfers, but always went to another course. I still don't know why someone would lie about owning a golf course. My will has something unusual. Story time. I sat my wife down to have a talk because I was getting ready to deploy to Iraq. This was during the incredible sectarian violence, and I wanted to make sure she knew everything to do in case I died. She's never serious. Ever. But I wanted her to be serious for this discussion, because it was damned important. I get through telling her all about it, and want to know if she has questions. Yeah, so. The life insurance. How does that work? She says. I don't really know, baby. What do you mean? She answers, well, do they just put the money in there? When? Look, she's not trying to be an asshole, right? It's not like she's just dying for the money. She wants to know the logistics of it. I'm sitting here thinking when she says, so do they put in my bank account? Or do they give you one of those big checks when you win the lottery? As she holds her hands up like she's holding a huge check. Laughter ensues. I have it written into the will that if in Kaya, I want the $400,000 to be given to her with a gigantic lottery check. Have base photo bring several folks over, shoot like the paparazzi as she stands on a stage, and do it. Lol. Edit. Fixed some spelling errors. Not exactly a reading of the will story, but in the same realm. When I was like 20, my dad told me that when he died I would be getting a chunk of money. Not millions, but enough to do something good with. Years later he and my mom separated. He met a new woman and got married. After talking to my brother and sister, we were all worried that she would change his will or get him to change it in favor of her kids. We agreed that we didn't want money, but just wanted any final wishes to be honored. The money couldn't hurt, though sadly after that he got cancer and died 2 years ago. After he died, my siblings and I agreed to just accept however his widow divided anything. She made sure things went where he had decided. My percentage was smaller because he had added her and her children in the 2 years. Since he passed, she hasn't talked to us much. She calls for holidays and stuff. She tries, but she is just kinda awkward. She's also sent large sums of money on 2 occasions because she sold some land he owned. She has shown me and my siblings that there are still good people. Sure, she might have kept most of the money, but she could have kept all of the money and we would never have known. When I was 16, my dad wrote me out of his will and then hung himself in the garage. It was few months after my older brother had died in a car wreck. Funny thing is, we always got along. I was then kicked out of the house by his wife without a single thing that was mine. It was on Christmas Eve, so I went to my mom's for a night, and when I came back to my dad's, the locks were changed. Not a single shirt, not a shoe, not a sock, nothing but the cloths on my back and the change in my pocket. When I was a clerk in law school at the State Court of Appeals, the adult children of a rich woman tried to invalidate the will. Basically, the woman was worth about $8 million and all the children were working professionals earning 6 or 7 figures. Well, the woman had used the same hairdresser for multiple years and left a considerable amount in a trust for the hairdresser's children's education. The remainder of the estate was given to different charities. Basically, the kids were mad they didn't get a cut. Edit. A lot of people asking how it turned out. Truth is, I don't know. We remanded on some procedural issues and I never followed up on it. One of my former bosses was getting up in age and had no children. One day we were discussing family history and he mentioned how he still had the old family Bible his grandparents brought over from Germany with the whole family tree handwritten into it, which I thought was an amazing thing to have. But he went on to lament that when he died it was going to have to go to his ungrateful, good-for-nothing niece, since the old rules of inheritance said she should get it, even though he knew she didn't care a thing about the family history. Several of us involved in the discussion tried to convince him that there had to be some other family member that would give it the respect it deserved, or barring that, a historical society that would know what to do with it, but he would have none of it, since that just isn't the way it is done. Years later I thought of this while attending his funeral and tried to figure out who was that niece, maybe in hopes of broaching the subject with her, but never could. I still wonder about it sometimes and hope for his sake that it ended up in good hands. Title examiner here. I once reader will where the decedent left his presumably gay son the 12 feet of rope in my tool shed so the faggot can do us all a favor and hang himself. His words, not mine. There are some truly terrible people in this world. An ancestor of mine in the rural UK in the 1700s died and left his farm and everything to his nephew, no children, with his surviving wife only getting the second best bed and a provision her to receive 3 pounds of butter per week for the rest of her life. We thought this was incredibly mean, but we wonder whether this butter was meant as an income. I mean, who can eat 3 pounds of butter? If I remember my history right, the best bed was reserved for the guest room, with the second best bed being put in the master bedroom. Chances are Denny was leaving her the bed they had used for most, if not all, of their marriage. Traditionally speaking, the best of everything would go to the children, or in this case presumably the nephew, while the widow would get the second best of everything. As well as this, a good bed would be equal in value to that of a small house, though this was mainly for the prosperous citizens. As for the butter, I'd have to go with her having to use it as a form of income. Years ago, worked in a retirement community. Older man we knew was gay, developed a late in life relationship, and moved into the community with his gay lover. He was a career vet, multiple honors, a wall of medals. He was also a bit of an asshole most days, but he had moments over a meal. His stories were fantastic. His children over 3 years never once visited him. He had a heart attack and knew he was going to die. His children showed up, but demanded his lover leave for visits. In his will he left everything to his lover and his lover's one child from a former marriage. He wrote a long note about his kids' hypocrisy of not visiting and their attitudes toward his lover. He left each of his 2 kids a pail of collash to be deducted from his estate, had his estate pay for his lover's plot to be next to him and his wife, and in his long letter that his kids, if they visited him in his death, would be reminded of why they didn't visit, why he was alive. It was, frankly, awesome hearing his kids blow up about it. Edited to clarify a term I used. My sister spent a couple years working for a long-standing organization in Philly that's been accepting bequeathments since the late 18th century. Her job was to help organize the various trusts they had to administer, as well as going around advising people not to do things like this, and just leave them a lump sum. People had a habit of leaving them an annual trust. That $5 a year was a princely sum in 1813. But by now it's just a complete nuisance, or of leaving them ridiculously specific things to do every year. The worst example, I remember, I'm a little fuzzy on the details, was a woman who left funds to purchase books for school children in Liberia. Problem is, her funds now don't buy more than a couple books, and she left instructions for someone to deliver the books, not to ship them. When my grandparents on my mother's side were dying of cancer, my uncle Black Sheep, piece of shoot of the family who I've never met, thank God, wanted to know what he was getting from the inheritance when they died. Not how's mom and dad, or what can I do to help. My grandparents, being the people they were still going to give him an inheritance after all the fricked up things he did to them, but my mom, the power of attorney, convinced them that they shouldn't be manipulated by him anymore. They ended up writing him an email back telling him that he wouldn't be included in the will anymore. He ended up threatening to burn their house down, my house down, killing me and my family etc. for betraying him. And you know what my grandparents did? They ended up including him in the will and sending him exactly 1 penny in check form by mail. That was the last time I have heard from him since. I work for a brokerage firm, and I often deal with account beneficiaries. We had a client leave his entire account to a stripper. After the client died, his wife discovered her husband had left his life savings to Jane Sparkles Smith. She was pissed. Really pissed. Lawyer here. We normally don't actually do a reading of the will here like they do in the movies. It's much more boring. We just fire up the probate and send notice to all the heirs. The weirdest one I saw was a guy that was worth about $2 million who left my Carhartt jacket and $1 to my son. I hope it keeps him warm when he winds up sleeping under a bridge. The kid had a drug issue. I also had someone leave an antique commode to one of his kids. Yes, he considered an elderly toilet to be a family heirloom. The guy was actually pretty excited to get the toilet. It was the last thing they had left to remember their grandma by. I shoot you not. Pun intended. A friend had two sisters. When their father passed away, their mom had died in their childhood. Anyway, years go by and the oldest daughter is the only one who keeps in contact with the father for various reasons. Dude was an abusive dick, played favorites, all of that shoot. Older sister was obviously the favorite as she got everything. The other daughter and son my friend got $1 apiece. Oldest sister could have been a dick about it, but decided to be bro status. They all sat down to dinner on a night and big sister was like, listen, dad left me all of this. It was a pretty sizable amount of money. She could have taken it and lived comfortably without working till the day she died. Maybe. Definitely, if she managed the money proper. She sat down with her little brother and sister and was like, 3 ways even? Deal. End of it. You all would think that you would do the same for your brother, sister, best friend, whatever. Yeah, I'd be surprised what people are really like when money is involved. Even a small amount of it. F-ked up. Not in this case though. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm deputy public administrator, and we find wills. Oft we deal with individuals who died without any known family or the family is estranged, and we have to locate them. One of the wills I read said no fucking lawyers in the text, and another one stated I would like crack powder stuffed in my ears and cremated. I'm a trust attorney. I can't tell you how many times the surviving spouse from a blended marriage cuts out the stepkids. They always try to justify it to me, even though I really don't care. I'm not there to judge. Los Angeles residents are especially concerned about their pets. I've written trust, where the pets inherit more than the kids. It's always awkward when I have to tell a child they were disinherited. No easy way to tell a person that. Not a lawyer, but an estate planning paralegal for many years. I've read, drafted or executed thousands of wills and trusts with clients. My first nitpicky comment is that the common belief that lawyers actually assemble the whole family and hold a reading of the will is entirely a construct of TV. You would never sit there and just read a will to people. It's mostly a bunch of legalese about bonds and payment of taxes and the powers of the executor. Only a very small portion of the will actually pertains to distributions, and in many cases it's just a paragraph stating that everything goes to the spouse if living, otherwise equally to the kids, or to the trust, which then says it all goes to spouse and kids. Believe it or not, they're usually pretty mundane. When strings are attached, it's usually just parents trying to make sure their kids go to college or they get a smaller distribution, or just have to wait longer to get their money. People who don't have kids usually name about 24 beneficiaries, which is cumbersome and annoying, especially since a lot of times they don't even have much money to divide. People with kids almost always just leave the money to them equally. Probably the most fricked up thing I've seen is a couple different clients who included provisions to disinherit kids and grandkids if they married a black person. That's their prerogative and will serve them professionally, but we tended not to get too cozy or chatty at those signings, unlike with many of the nice clients with whom we would become friendly. Just get him in, get him out in those cases. I'm not a lawyer, but my family has an odd story involving a will. Several generations back, a woman along with her brothers in our family inherited a huge sum of money from her father, oil money in Oklahoma. At the time, women were allowed to inherit property/assets if single, but all assets would have been transferred to her husband if she married. She wasn't too happy about the situation and, in protest, never took a husband. She had a few friends over the course of her life and lived a very comfortable life until dying of old age, at which time her estate was divided amongst all of the female descendants in the family. TL, DNR, my great-great-great aunt of something was a badass feminist beach. Edit, typus.